Welcome everybody to the latest BuffZone podcast. I'm Brian Howell. Pleased to be joined by my colleague Pat Rooney. And Pat, how you doing?
Doing well. It's been a while. How you been?
I've been good. It has been a while. I mean, some travel schedules have gotten in the way, and I had jury duty this week and had to spend 3 days in a courtroom in Greeley. So, but here we are talking some football and basketball today.
Well, good to see your face, and hope the jury duty wasn't too tedious. But yeah, basketball season full swing. Obviously, it's been a terrible start for the men's team. But before we get into it, let's talk a little bit about what's going on this week at the East-West Shrine Game festivities. Leading into it, you were going to go down there for us and
Yeah,
cover it. Obviously, a number of Buffs are participating. The jury duty got in the way, but your take, obviously, Shedeur Sanders was going to play. I wasn't surprised he pulled out at all. Quite frankly, I was surprised he was still signed up for it for as long as he was. As we all know, top prospects don't tend to, especially quarterback prospects, tend
yeah,
to play in this game. More of a showcase for kind of later round projected draft picks. The Buffs have a number of those, especially at receiver. But I know you've followed it, even though you've been a little tied up this week. But what's been some of your impressions of the Buffs that are working out down there in front of a lot of NFL personnel?
yeah. So yeah. First of all, I was booked to go down there. I was going down there Tuesday morning,
Yeah.
and I had jury duty on Monday, and so for anybody that's ever had it, have you ever had jury duty, by the way?
No, but by the
Okay.
way, your text to me, I think it was on Monday, when you were still kind of unsure about the flight the next day, you text back to me. The judge didn't care that I had a trip the next day.
Right. So it was, I've had so many, I've been called to jury duty 6 or 7 times. And one time I actually
Yeah.
served on a jury. Um, and you have different experiences. Like sometimes your number gets called and you call on Friday night and they don't need your number. So you don't even have to report and you're done. And
I've
so
had
I
a
was,
couple of those. I've had a
yeah,
couple of those. I've never gone as far into it as
yeah.
you did.
So I was sort of banking on something like that, or you show up and kind of go through the process, but you get sent home and you're done by Monday and get on my flight Tuesday. But so I got to the process by the end of the day Monday where you had to fill out a questionnaire, and I put on there. There's no hardship, but I do have a business trip on Tuesday that I would like to not miss. And so you get in front of the judge, and he asked me, about the business trip and what is it and there's the prosecuting attorneys there asking me questions. And so I'm telling him, like, I cover football. I'm going down there for this all-star game. And so they're like, oh, so it's not like life or death. you know, basically, they didn't deem it that important. And so I said, it was not the end of the world if I miss it. I would just love to be there. And the judge was like, well, in light of that, we'll see you tomorrow morning at 8:15. I was like, okay, great. So canceled the trip, did not get to cover the East West Shrine game. Did not get picked for the jury after all that, and which I was sort of glad for. It's a first degree murder case, and it would have gone well into next week, and so I'm
Yeah, I
sort of
might not
glad
have
for
seen.
that.
I might have not have seen you until the spring game if that had happened.
We wouldn't be doing this right now because I would be in day one of the trial right now, so I'm pretty glad for that. But anyway, with that, I did still pay attention. Tuesday was a the dumbest day ever, by the way, for jury duty. I was supposed to show up at 8:15, and I literally was there until 5 o'clock, and I didn't do anything. I sat there and waited for the next thing, and there was nothing for me to do. So I sat at the courtroom 8:15 in the morning until 5 p.m. and got some work done and covered caught up on East West Shrine coverage, things like that. And so um bottom line, following it, it sounds like the receivers did really well. LeJohntay Westford, Jimmy Horn, Will Shepard had pretty good weeks down there. From what I saw, Jake Schwanitz at DNVR was down there, and obviously, you know, when we cover the Buffs, we've got a little bit more of a of a biased eye. But according to him, and really according to others that weren't covering CU, those receivers did really well, which I'm not surprised.
Yeah, obviously, an important showcase for players like that want to improve their draft stock,
Yeah,
kind of turn maybe some heads and attention from NFL personnel. Let me ask you this. Obviously, we know Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter are going to hear their names pretty quickly on draft night. After that, You mentioned receivers. I imagine BJ Green is in this conversation. Who do you see as the next Buffs going off the board? Because, last few years or, in recent memory, uh, you know, not a lot of Buffaloes hearing their names during the draft. We might get a late selection, a lot of undrafted free agent type signings, but we're going to hear a few guys called this year after Sanders and Travis Hunter. Who comes next from Colorado?
Yeah, I think it's gonna be really interesting to see who that is. And I think there's still a lot of work to be done to know who that's going to be. I think that there's a couple guys going to the combine. There's pro days. I think a lot of that's going to depend on that. But if I sat here today, I would probably say BJ Green would be the next guy off the board. It would not surprise me if it was Will Shepherd, who among those three receivers you would probably at CU rank third. I would rank him, behind LeJohntay and Jimmy Horn. But as far as NFL, he's got the big NFL body,
Yeah.
and I think he impresses scouts that way. And obviously, he's very skilled. So I would go one of those two guys. What about you?
Probably the same. BJ Green's kind of the one that springs to mind for me, but still a lot of work to do. The combine's still coming up. That question or that answer might change between now and April, but obviously edge rushers always a key component for any NFL defense. Maybe even more so in today's game. So, receivers. I always feel like you can find receivers at the NFL level. So I
Yeah.
think someone like BJ Green and his skill set might set him apart a little bit. But we'll see. Still plenty of time to go between now and then. But great to see those guys getting some attention down there. And sorry you couldn't make it.
Yeah, I am too. I would say if you went just off of how they performed in college, LeJohntay Wester and Cam Sillman Craig would be my guesses. But and LeJohntay might be because of the fact that he can return punts as well. So
Yeah.
in a way, you're drafting two guys. Jimmy can too. Cam Sillman Craig, I think if you just went off production, would be a high draft pick. But he's I think he's going to be looked at as undersized and go later in the draft. I still think he's a draft pick though. So either way, I think it's going to be a fun draft. We got a lot of time between now and then, and we'll break it down a little bit more closer to April. But yeah, it's been a couple years since we've heard any Buffs drafted, let alone two surefire top five picks and several others that might get drafted as well. So I'm planning on being busy draft weekend, whereas in
Yeah.
the past it's been like, eh. I don't know if I need to watch. There's really nothing to cover. So I'm looking
Right.
forward to maybe being a little bit busy on draft weekend.
Well, I'm sure you will be. And now you probably don't have to worry about hearing your number called by the government now that
Right.
you've
Yeah.
kind of done your time a little bit. But
I should be good for a while. I would hope so, and
yeah,
I'm looking
I'm
forward.
not sure how that works, but I would think you wouldn't get picked back to back. But what do I know? Turning our attention, obviously we're right in the middle of hoop season, and it's been a while since we caught up on a podcast, but
Yeah.
nothing has really changed, unfortunately, for the CU men. Still really struggling through their start in the Big 12. The women, as we're talking here, just picked up a big road win at BYU last night. Less about the opponent. BYU has struggled, lost some close games in Big 12 play, but a talented team, and it's the first road, moreover, it's a first road win for the women in Big 12 play. They've played pretty well at home, have had some hiccups on the road. So, as far as building a tournament resume, a good win for them to pick up at BYU last night. But obviously, we'll start with men, and obviously, you don't watch them as closely as I have, but I'm just surprised. I'm surprised it's come to this. I didn't think, I've said it before. This is trending to be wrong on my part. I didn't think they'd be the number 15 team in the Big 12. That's not saying I thought they'd be number 16 either. I thought they'd eke out some wins here and there. And even going into the Big 12, I still felt pretty good about that. We saw how they played in Maui. But at this point, there's no easy schedule or portion of the schedule in Big 12 play. But comparatively, they've kind of gone through one of the more forgiving parts of their Big 12 schedule. They've let
Yeah.
some opportunities slip away. And now they got to try to fight this uphill battle to, eking out some wins against what's going to be a much more difficult schedule in February. than what they generally faced in January. And I think that's the alarming part. Their best chances at wins have already kind of gone off the board.
Yeah, and Tuesday was one of them. I mean, you lose by 2 points
Yes.
to Arizona State, and there were so many chances. I did watch that game. Um, a lot of times they're playing at the same time as the women, and I miss them. But I did watch a lot of that game, and it was just kind of like, man, this team. Every time I watch them, they're just doing something to lose a game. Whereas decent teams are going to do something to win a game, whereas this team always has something to where, yep, you lost because of that right there and that right there. And it's I can't imagine how frustrated Tad Boyle has been throughout this process because, as you mentioned, they're 0-9 in conference. And what would you guess? Three or four of those games they could have easily won. I mean, they could have and maybe should have won at UCF. They could have and maybe
Yeah.
should have won against ASU the other night. And
Yes.
there's maybe one or two others you look at. Well, Cincinnati at home.
They were right there at the end against Cincinnati and West Virginia.
Yep.
And quite frankly, not that you expect them to upset Iowa State, but let's not forget that was a close game still with about 5, 6 minutes left in the game, and Iowa State
Right.
pulled away down the stretch as well. So, um,
And
I think the
BYU,
alarming
BYU,
part.
I mean,
Oh,
I know BYU ended up not being close, but they had a 14-0 run in that game and take a 10-point lead. And the
yeah,
next like 15 minutes were some of the most atrocious basketball I've ever seen by a CU team. I think it was 39-6 was the
yeah.
run or something like that. So it's been a variety of ways to lose games, but yeah, you're right. I mean, three or four that like I think they could easily be 3-6 right now instead of 0-9.
Absolutely. I go back to that UCF game down there, and I keep coming about the Colorado had think about this. They had a 3-point lead, under 3 minutes left, had the ball, wound up not allowing another field goal the rest of the way, and still managed to lose by a point. Yeah,
Yeah,
and you think it on those terms, they're already in the bonus. Took a couple really bad fouls, put UCF on the line, couldn't execute at their end offensively. But I keep thinking about that. It's like, wow, you had the ball, you had the lead, you didn't give up another field goal, and you still managed to lose that game.
yeah,
And it's been one thing and another. At Arizona State, they didn't really show up. They got run out of the gym at Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State is not one of the better teams in the Big 12. Going into the year, that was one of the games I thought, okay, if they're going to steal a road win, UCF and maybe Oklahoma State coming out of the gate, or at least in the early portion, or even Arizona State as well. Three
yeah,
of the January road games, I thought those were opportunities to maybe steal road wins along the way. Because you get into February, they're not going to win at Kansas and Iowa State. And it's going to be, probably not Texas Tech either at the end. Texas Tech is playing great right now. So,
yeah,
you let these chances go away. And Tad Boyle alluded to this the other night. And this, I'm sure, is, among the many frustrations, this has to be up there. You want to be a better basketball team in February, obviously, than you are in November and December. And he said it after the game the other night. Right now, they're not a better team than they were in Maui.
yeah,
When they played in Maui, even though they lost a couple of those, they lost Michigan State, they lost Iowa State fairly handily against Michigan State, very handily against Iowa State. They beat UConn in between, played really well.
right.
Coming out of that, I still felt pretty good about okay, they're not going to finish 15th in the Big 12. Again, I didn't think this was an NCAA tournament team. I thought they could surprise, finish 13, 12 in a really good year, maybe eke up into 11 or 10. I didn't think, maybe an NIT bubble or sneak into that in a really good year. I still felt pretty good about that going into Big 12. I still felt pretty good about that, even the way they played against Iowa State that opening night.
Yeah,
But the way it's kind of eroded since then, Tab Boyle said they're not a better team right now than they were in November. And going forward, they can be a better team in February, but it doesn't necessarily mean the wins will follow. I've noted that in a couple of my extra points columns.
yeah,
If they can, this upcoming stretch, they play a stretch where they got these two road games coming up. They haven't been very good on the road. They got TCU and Utah. Again, Utah is another one beginning of the year. Maybe that's a team that they can sneak up and maybe win on the road. But the way they've played on the road thus far, you can't really be confident in any of them. Then after that, you've got Houston, you got Baylor and Kansas down the road. You visit Kansas, you visit Iowa State. They can play better, and it won't necessarily mean they're denting the win column finally.
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at it, I mean, I sort of look at 4 games as their best chances to get a win, and 3 of them are on the road. And
Yeah,
it's
and the way
at
they've played on the road,
right.
you can't be real confident. They played pretty tough at Arizona, all things considered. It was a 2-point game at halftime, in the last road game. Um, but you just had a sense that it's only a matter of time before
Yeah.
things start falling apart, and that's what happened. Some Buffs teams, you feel confident they're going to stay in the fight. That was a 2-point game at halftime, and you still felt like, okay, Arizona's just going to turn it on at some point and finish this, and that's basically what happened.
Yeah. And I mean, at TCU, at Utah, the next 2 games, those are 2 games you say might be winnable. As you mentioned, I mean, Utah was picked 16th coming into the season, but they're better than that. At K-State later in the year. And then UCF at home, you look at it and say, well, you only lost by 1 on the road. UCF's one of those teams that, I mean, they've beaten all the teams that are the lower level of the conference. All their losses are
Right.
against those really good teams in the conference, and CU's the only lower the lower end team that even came close to really beating them. Maybe CU should have won that game, but there are a couple chances. But man, it's really hard to pinpoint. Now, watch them go out and and finish 1 or whatever in the conference, and their 1 win is like at Kansas or something like that.
Yeah, right.
They'll do something like that where it's, they'll play out of their mind 1 game and they get that win. I I don't think it's going to be at Kansas, but like I do think there's enough talent on this team that I can't see them going over in the conference. I still think they're going to find a win or 2 somewhere, but don't ask me where because I have
Yeah.
no idea where it's going to be.
Yeah, you look at that UCF game at home, which kind of now stands out as the most likely. Utah scored only 36 points at home against Houston recently, but the Buffs aren't Houston.
Yeah, yeah,
And Utah has been a pretty solid team so far as well. And again, on the road, until they play well on the road, you can't really feel good about their chances in any of the road games. So,
yeah,
and then you come back from that, you got Houston home at Kansas, then you got UCF at home. But I'll tell you what, the Buffs don't play better defense. Central Florida is very good on offense. And right now, you look at the numbers, I kind of look at, we've gone long enough into conference play now that I like looking at the conference game numbers as opposed to overall statistics.
right.
And the Buffs aren't great at really anything, but they're kind of middle of the pack in most offensive numbers, except for the turnovers. Obviously, they're the worst turnover team in the conference. But you look at shooting percentages, scoring, they're kind of middle of the pack in general. You look at the defensive numbers, and they're way down there. So even UCF coming here, you're gonna have to find a way to play some improved defense is to slow them down a little bit, or you're not getting a win. Even the other night against Arizona State, the Buffs played better in the second half. They finally cut their turnovers down. They had 10 at halftime. They had 9 with there for a while there. They're on like a 30 turnover pace in the first 10 minutes of the game, just throwing the ball
Yeah,
around. They officially had a turnover without taking time off the clock, throwing it away on the very first inbounds after the very first basket. It was a sight to behold some of the things
yeah,
that are happening. But but Arizona State shot 50% in the second half. So your comeback bid kind of falls short because you can't get any stops when you need to. And Arizona State was playing without a couple key guys. Say when their top freshman was out and their leading scorer went out during the first half and didn't return. So, even with UCF coming in here, if you don't play better defense and you haven't really shown so far that you can, it's not like you can just assume that a win's going to happen.
right. Yeah, and you'll be down there on Sunday at TCU. I mean, that's a team 10-10. They've lost 3 in a row, but I mean, their last win was against Baylor. So
Yeah.
it's tough to see them getting a win down at TCU, but you know that's where I mean they've got to steal a game like that, right? I mean that's a winnable game that you can go down there and get.
And so is Utah
Yeah,
right after that, 2 road games in a row. But this team just has nothing they can hang their hat on.
yeah,
Offensively, Julian Ammon is, going into this year, if you'd have said Julian Hammond have this kind of year, maybe you want the assist to turnovers be a little bit better. But some of the assist numbers is a product of not guys not shooting the ball well
Right.
as well on offense.
Hmm.
He's had a couple bad turnover games, but everyone has on this team. But I think you would take the rest of the offensive numbers going into the year from Julian Hammond. The three graduate transfers, Trevor Baskin's been inconsistent. Elijah Malone, missed a couple games, and hasn't shown what he showed in Maui. I thought he'd be able to at least kind of provide a big body in the Big 12. But he's kind of been a non-factor so far in
Yeah.
conference play. He had a pretty good rebounding game recently at Arizona. Maybe that'll spark a little bit more out of him in the middle. And Andre Yakimovsky, is playing. Ty Boyle says he's playing consistent defensively. And he's a gamer. He's going to be out. Had the 4-year career, obviously at Washington State, but he hasn't shot the ball nearly as well as they expected out of him. He's kind of shown a little bit of spark recently, as has Javon Ruffin. He's shooting the ball a little bit better of late. He was banged up early, kind of got off to a terrible start from 3-point range. Maybe if he keeps shooting well, I should say, as he has in the last few weeks, that can help. Stealing a win on the road, they're going to need a good 3-point game on the road. They haven't really done that. They hit a
Hmm.
couple late against Arizona when it kind of didn't matter at that point. Julian Hammond did, especially. So the final numbers weren't bad. But, a lot of guys have underperformed that they expected to get more out of. The graduate transfers, a lot of the older players as well. And to be clear, it's not one guy. This has been a team effort across the board. But they need some of these guys to start getting hot if they are going to find a way to dent the win column a little bit more going forward.
Yeah. And you're right about
A little
Hammond with
bit more, if at
yeah.
all, going
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah, and you're right with Hammond on the assists. I mean, some of those point guards, I would love to be able to see how many assists should they have had if the
Right.
guy that they threw it to would have made the easy layup or the,
And for instance, at Arizona, when the game was still close, Yakimovsky kind of botched a couple easy fast break layups. And I forget who was the pass on the top of my head here. I forget who the passer was. I
yeah,
think one of them might have been RJ Smith. But to your point, there's a couple easy buckets that went off the board, and a couple easy assists for this team that turned into turnovers,
yeah.
just for simple passing and catching things that should be a given at this level.
Well, and that's why they're 0-9 in the conference
Exactly.
because they're not
Exactly.
a given. So,
Right.
um, switching gears to the women, you mentioned earlier they got a big win at BYU. You look at the standings, and you wouldn't say it's a big win. BYU's now 1-8 in the conference. It's big because it was the first one on the road, and really the first one in almost a year on the road in conference play. Their last one was February 4th last year. We remember last year that really good team they had a skid late in the year, and they lost their last three conference road games. Now they were all the like top 15 teams, but they still lost them. So they had lost seven conference road games in a row. Um, Nearly lost that one last night, but
Yeah.
eke it out 67-66. And Tabitha Betson of all people, their freshman center who hadn't hit a three-pointer since December 10th, hits two of them, including the game winner last night with a minute 10 left. And then they get a couple defensive stops, and Betson was right there in the last sequence getting a couple of those. So important win for them because they're that team, Pat. I mean, the men obviously NCAA tournament's gone, NIT, whatever. Just go get a win.
Yeah.
But this women's team, this time the last 3 years we're like, yeah, they're going to the NCAA tournament. It's just a matter of where. Well, this team, it's like they're on the bubble. They're squarely on the bubble,
Right.
and number 61 in the net rankings, which is that's the bubble,
Yeah.
And BYU was 84, so you can't afford to lose games to teams below you in the net rankings, and so that was a big win because of that. And J.R. Payne said it after the game that sometimes when you're struggling in an area, whether it's overall like the men, she didn't say that, or on the road, it's just you get that one and it just lifts a lot of pressure off your back. And so I think that was big for them to go get that road win.
Absolutely. And I mentioned this a couple times in the extra point column prior to the win at BYU that conceivably they could go unbeaten the rest of the way at home and lose the rest of the road games and still
Yeah,
be in that tournament conversation. In that scenario, they probably need, maybe more than just one win at the Big 12 tournament, but cross that bridge sort of situation. The point was they didn't necessarily need the road win. The home
right.
ledger, they already have a home win against West Virginia, against K-State. They'd have a couple other nice wins if that scenario panned out. But you don't want to paint yourself into that corner. And, to your point, picking up that win at BYU, to not go winless on the road was huge for this team, especially for a team that, on paper, you're supposed to be beating. So a good win
Yeah,
for the women. And also the thing is, it's an opportunity now for them to get on a bit of a roll, which we haven't quite seen yet. Not for an extended couple week, let the wins pile up a little bit. They come home
right.
now for Texas Tech and Arizona. The Buffs have been pretty good at home so far. And then you pocket those couple wins, and now you got a nice little win streak on the road before you take and a little momentum that you can take back out on the road to a couple more tougher matchups than BYU. But this, kind of paves the way for a little mini run for this team to get on.
Yeah, and it's funny the ebbs and flows of a season, right? Because
Yeah,
they really they fumbled away a game at Cincinnati a couple weeks ago, and that's a team that Cincinnati's not great. I mean, they're one of the, I mean, they're same record as CU in the standings right now, but not a great team. Certainly one that CU should have won, in my opinion. And I looked at that and I was like, man, that was two in a row. There's a chance where they'll go on a little bit of a slide because their next game was at home against number 10 K State, and then it's
yeah,
back on the road to BYU. I'm like, they're looking at potentially a 4-game losing streak. Well, they upset K State. You beat BYU, and now you have a chance to go on a little bit of a run here, like you mentioned, because the next two are at home against Texas Tech and Arizona, two teams that are below them in the standings, and you should beat those teams at home. And so you do that, take some momentum at Iowa State and Utah on the road, two good teams. But if you take some momentum and you've already got that winning feeling on the road, then maybe you go get and steal one of those there. So yeah, there is a chance
right.
here for them to gain some momentum.
Yeah, well, the BYU game gives them a little bit of cushion, right? You don't go out
Yeah,
onto the road trip, especially if you win these home games and take care of business. You don't go out on that road trip kind of still, pressing for that first win, like you mentioned. It kind
yeah,
of, I hate the phrase "take the monkey off your back." As far as winning on the road, it's not quite house money yet, but you're getting there. When you take care of business against BYU, and you take care of these home games going into that road trip. You can kind of play with that house money a little bit and let the chips fall, and maybe you come. If you split those games at Iowa State and at Utah, you feel pretty good about that coming back home again, right?
yeah,
This is an opportunity. You take care of these home games this weekend, and you feel good about your chances of doing that.
yeah. Well, the biggest thing they do is when they go on the road next week in a couple weeks at Iowa State, they won't have Brian Howell asking them, well, how about this road losing streak? So I guess I'm the
I
monkey that
think
would be
that's
on the
really,
back, right?
yeah, I think that's really where to start from. And,
Right.
I wish I could not ask about another loss again, but
I
here
bet you
we
that was
are.
that I bet you that was their motivational speech before the game with JR. It's like, look, if you do not want Brian to ask you this question before Iowa State,
Yeah,
go get a win. I bet you that's what they did.
I'm sure.
So yeah, so yeah, but good one for the women, and really, I'll just say this: they did it. Jade Masagayo, who's been one of their best players throughout the season, picks up her second foul 3 minutes into the game and doesn't play the last 17 minutes of the first half. Frida Foreman didn't. I think she had 2 points in the first half, and so that's your top two scorers that basically didn't do much in the first half, and you still won the game. So you got to feel
Yeah,
pretty good about that.
yeah, absolutely. So big weekend at home for the women. Men, I'll be at TCU on Sunday. It's interesting. One point meant to kind of joke with you about. I'm still getting used to both of us kind of being at games at the exact same time, which has
Yeah,
happened, and it's going to happen again on Sunday.
right.
In the Pac-12 schedule, that rarely took place in conference play. So kind of a little wrinkle, kind of all these differences so far, but that's one of them. We'll both be on hand for the respective games on Sunday.
Yeah, because all the women's conference games were always Friday, Sunday, and the men rarely played on Fridays and Sundays. And
Yeah.
so,
Well, it's weird. They still don't play on Fridays, the men, but
yeah,
a lot more Sunday games for sure.
yeah, and the women don't play on Friday either. I mean, a lot of them,
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
kind of a Wednesday, Saturday, a
Yeah.
lot of times. So, um, so yeah, it'll be interesting. In fact, the day of the Arizona game, for you tipped off the
Yeah.
exact same time
Right.
as the women playing K-State, and so I actually joked with a colleague of ours that was at the women's game. I said, all right, how many upsets we getting today? One or
Yeah.
two? And
Yeah.
originally was like zero, and I said I'm going to go two. I'm going to be confident and go two. I never thought the men would win that game, but we pretty much settled on one. The women got theirs, but there was a lot of that game where we're looking at it, we're like, are the men
Yeah.
actually going to pull this thing out? And kind
Yeah.
of as expected, Arizona, got its act together late and pulled away and got that win. But um,
But I'll tell you what, if they play like that more often, if they play like that at Utah, they've got a
yeah,
pretty good chance of winning.
right,
The turnovers are always a problem with this team. It's the Tad Boyle teams have never been great at them, but this has been a whole new level this year. Some of the things that have happened on the turnover front. So you never know what's going to happen there. But if they play like they did at Arizona for the better part of that game, I don't think they win at Kansas or Iowa State, but
yeah.
you can win maybe at TCU, but you certainly can win at Utah if you play like that.
Yeah. Well, we'll see this weekend before Utah. They've got to beat TCU. Big one on Sunday for both teams. The women have got to beat Texas Tech. That's a team behind them. That's a big one they got to get. And the men, have that opportunity at TCU. So we'll see what happens on Sunday. Pat will cover it from Fort Worth. I'll cover it from Boulder. And Buff fans, we'll see you next week. We'll talk more basketball and see what's going on football wise. There's still a contract extension sitting there for Deion Sanders. So we'll see if that's happened to be signed by next week.
Well, I'm sure you will be among the first to report the news if and when that happens. And as always, folks, we'll have more hoops news this week. Follow us over the weekend for this week's games, and we will pod again soon. Thanks for listening.